But I think there's something to that. The more and more we get to looking for our truths, then you just got to start throwing out things that disagree with that from the Bible.
Mm-hmm.
And to that point, and to your point earlier, I mean, does that not make us a heretic?
Whoops.
So maybe we are. When the choice seems to be to tear down the church
or build a wall around it,
we aim to walk the narrow road of nuance
through the wilderness between the warring factions,
and try to figure out what it means
to love God
and people well. Well, hello, everybody, and welcome to episode 35 of the Unbetween podcast. As you heard on our last episode, there was a lot of talk about heretics and heresy and all sorts of things that we have kind of discussed a little bit for some time now, and we felt like it was necessary that we have a certain conversation on this episode.
And as with so many of the things that we talk about, it's not necessarily that we're coming to the table with, here's what I think, and you should think the same thing. As you'll hear me say, I have some thoughts to work out, and I'd seek the input and wisdom of my friend Ryan and seeing if we can't come to some resolution. And I think we made some progress, but y'all will have to be the judge of that.
Did you say wisdom from me?
I did.
All right, let's do it. So heresy.
How do we get ourselves into this situation?
How do we get ourselves into any situation, really?
Well, I like how you sidestepped the question that neither of us wants to answer.
I think it's something I don't know what the word is, pranced around for a little while. And
that's pretty good.
Last episode, it was like, there's no more prancing. We're here.
Yeah. Well, so, I think for my part, that's a word that I kind of react strongly to, because it's a word that I've heard a lot in my life. We kind of talked in our last episode about some of the stricter, more careful, more conservative, dare I say, more fundamentalist kind of things that I have been around, especially when I was younger, growing up in church, and that probably some of those experiences are shared by a lot of our listeners, if not all of them, to greater or lesser degrees. Right. And that was kind of a word that showed up a lot and got applied to people who didn't toe the party or the denominational line sometimes. But I guess more recently, there's kind of this contingent of folks online who sort of see it as their role to police the gospel, for lack of a better word. And sometimes they'll just come right out and say, like, that's why we're here. And kind of in keeping with the theme of our last episode, I get it. I think there's good intent behind it, that we do want to in some way qualify or even define this is what it means to be a Christian. But I think without the proper guardrails, what that can turn into is anybody who doesn't follow this strict theological camp is not in the family of faith, is the way that it gets expressed a lot of the time. And that even if it's expressed cordially, or even if it doesn't show up in the way that you treat people publicly in private circles in those kind of thought tribes, that's really what people think. If you don't agree with us, then you're not a believer, or you're backslidden, or something along those lines. So, and I don't know how many answers we'll get to. It's just that, like, on the one hand, the word heretic or heresy shouldn't come too quickly out of our mouths, kind of for reasons that we talked about in our last conversation, that there's the heretic in your head, and there's the way that you mature and grow in knowledge and wisdom, and that the things that you believed strongly 5 years ago, you may not believe now, not because you've deconstructed or apostatized or whatever, but just because you've matured as a believer and the Lord has taught you things and, increased your understanding or whatever. But conversely, it's not like, well, anything goes and anything is fine, and anybody who says Jesus is in the family either. So I don't know. I think maybe there's an opportunity for further conversation about when is it appropriate to use the word heretic or heresy, and when is it being uncharitable or divisive. So what are your thoughts?
Yeah, and I think we need to back up a little bit, and maybe even define it. I saw a meme the other day. I almost sent it to you, and it had like 4 pictures, and it was like ticks, and it was like seed tick, dog tick, wood tick, and then it said heretic, and it had a picture of Rob Bell. And I couldn't help but chuckle, and I almost sent it to you just because I knew we were going to be having this
That's good.
conversation. But I think you raise a good point, and it's maybe a good reason to back up a little bit and kind of say, well, what is a heretic? What does that mean? Because I think you're right. At times it's like, well, and maybe even especially when you look at theological camps that can even biblically back it up. Now maybe there's one that's accurate, one that's not. Maybe there's reason for that. But there's people reading the Bible and seeing something about God, because that's what theology is the nature of God, and they're seeing that, and this is what they're believing. Now, I do believe if you're truly looking for God in the Bible and not yourself, you're going to find who God is, and you're going to have a clear, understanding of that.
Yeah.
Now, so it's to your point. Just because we disagree with something there doesn't mean I'm a heretic, you're a heretic, we're all a tick, or whatever. Or does it mean you're trying to get somewhere and this is just where you're falling at the moment? And I think that's important to take note of because, like we talked about, there's this process of sanctification, and that looks different, and it for everyone, it takes different amount of times to go through different things, and we don't really complete it until we're dead, right?
Yeah.
But I think that's important to note. And then when we look at it, I think you have a strong reaction for good reasons, but I have a strong reaction probably for the other reasons of, there's people out here saying things that are very problematic, and it's easy to give them a pass sometimes when maybe we shouldn't. And so I think there's kind of this, maybe one side or the other, and then there's a middle ground that's healthy if we can truly define what it is. What is something we're going through? Even you look at people who deconstruct, that's a process of it should be a process of trying to understand God better and your faith better, and it not be something you were just told and all these things of rules and towing the line. It's more than that. But then what about the other side of, hey, this is just blatantly wrong, and, we need to address this.
Yeah.
'Cause there's a lot of things that come to my mind, thinking through heresy and just even the last, 10 years. We've talked a little bit about a podcast you and I used to listen to quite often.
Yeah.
And, I think there's things there that are potentially, over the line when it comes to that. And so, in your mind, how would you define heresy? Not by the book, by the lines of, oh, well, fundamentalism, this is how this has to be, and if you're not, you're a heretic. But truly, what is heresy in your mindset?
Well, that's kind of why I wanted to have the conversation, because I don't know that I have clear lines driven around it. I'm kind of approaching as somebody who is bothered by the tenor and tone of the public conversation, disquieted, I guess. But I'm not wading in as somebody who says I have the answer. One of the things that I think is interesting is that if memory serves, the word heresy or heretic is not in the scriptures, is it?
I think there's some alluding to it.
There is, but that's what I'm talking about. We have a word or a couple of words that are loaded with meaning, that have an understanding in a modern context that I don't know have quite the same. I don't know if there's an ancient equivalent. That's a question. Somebody correct me.
What comes to mind would be like the false prophet,
right?
Mindset. I think that would be the quickest thing. I'm trying to look and see if there is. Others.
And you're right, but also those don't correlate exactly. And we can talk about the false prophet and false teacher thing as well.
And that's why, that's why I ask about defining it, because I think it's even a broader term than what we think. Maybe, it's not blatantly in Scripture, but it's also not blatantly even a religious thing, I don't believe, when you look at heresy and what it is. I think, it's a kind of a belief or opinion contrary to whatever a group is. Now, I've seen some definitions that are that vague, like a group out or a thought process or mindset outside of the group. And then I've seen some that blatantly address religious doctrine of some sort. And so I don't know, I don't think the one that blatantly addressed it was Webster necessarily. Maybe that's what I need to pull out here. But, I like looking at it. Let's see here. To disagree with the party leadership was heresy. An opinion, doctrine, or practice contrary to the truth or to generally accepted beliefs or standards. And so that's a pretty broad, definition if we're looking at there. That's not even just religious in nature.
Okay, so this is from dictionary.com. Heresy. Opinion or doctrine at variance with the orthodox or accepted doctrine, especially of a church or religious system. And then the secondary definition is the maintaining of such an opinion or doctrine. I think...
Can you look up Urban Dictionary real quick? Oh, let's get that one too.
This ought to be good.
I'm kidding. Don't do that. We likely can't say it on air.
Let's find out. Okay, here we go. Heresy, actions, statements, and thoughts which fall outside of that which is in the holy light of the God Emperor of mankind, and thus into the unholy darkness of the ruinous powers. Inquisitors, through their holy judgment, seek out and destroy heresy wherever they find it, and through any means necessary, including the drastic measures of exterminatus.
Yeah, no, so that's it. Now that we've got that,
that's pretty good. There's a rabbit trail there. I think point being is that I think the word as it's under its modern definition entered the public consciousness through religious discussion. And so that's probably what a lot of people think of when they hear it.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. And that's typically how we use it. It was interesting to me that there was just kind of that vague, broad, statement. 'Cause it's like, well, man, and then back to how we ended the last episode, maybe we're all heretics in some form or fashion. So. But I think that's important to look at. And I think the false prophet thing, I mentioned that even just because I think that's a big side of it. Because I think, a lot of things and a lot of when we talk about sin, it comes down to your motive. Mm-hmm. And when we look at heresy, I think there are people, and you've talked about this a little bit, who aren't necessarily out to get anyone. This is what they believe. This is what they think is important, and they're trying to share that with others. Now, I think that's a careful line because it doesn't matter really what's important to us necessarily, right? It's what does Scripture say, so I think we have to be careful with that. But I think there's some people who maybe don't have it figured out, who are teaching from an innocent viewpoint, let's put it that way, but are maybe stating some harmful things. Then I think there are others who at this point in their life, know what they're preaching, teaching, saying, maybe is the better way to put it, is harmful, but they continue to do it for the power, the money, the platform it deserves them, affords them.
I think in our last conversation, we quoted the Apostle Paul about their consciences are seared as with a hot iron.
Right.
And I think that we've said this a lot of times in these conversations that I don't think for the most part somebody gets up one day and is like, you know what I'm going to do today? I'm going to teach false doctrine or, kill somebody or whatever the extreme is that makes us wonder, how did this person end up in this spot? It is a slow war of attrition against our souls with our flesh and with the enemy that eventually you look up and you're like, wait a minute, how did we get here? Or you don't look up, you're just down the path. And I think there very much is, because I know people personally, and I have been this before, who have taught things and then later come back and said, you know what, my understanding of this has changed, and here's where I am now, because I've studied more and I've prayed more and I've accepted instruction, and I don't any longer hold to that view or whatever, and not even necessarily apologizing for it, because we can't help necessarily where we are at a given point in our lives, given our level of maturity and what have you, because no matter how good of a job you do, there's still room for growth there. We are children who are trying to be like our Father, and we'll never get it right perfectly, but with His help and with the leading of the Spirit and the mind of Christ, hopefully we look more and more like Him every day. So it's gonna happen. I think you landing on motive, like the question is, how do we handle it when it happens? And something I thought about when you were talking is, how does it benefit, like the false teacher or false prophet or wolf in sheep's clothing question? What am I getting out of it? And I think there's a difference in, just I thought this and now I don't. And I've thought it in good faith, and versus I thought this, but it's beneficial to me to continue in this line of thinking. So like we mentioned the Shiny Happy People documentary, and quite apart from the Duggars themselves, it gets into the weeds of the kind of larger thought movement that they were a part of and the leaders of that. And, these are people that financially and in other more nefarious ways, quote, benefited, quote unquote, from continuing to teach things that were harmful. There's a distinction there, I think.
But yeah, no, there's a difference. And then when we look at kind of what people are trying to do, we talked a little bit about comfort. And I think there are people who they're not really seeking to be more like Christ every day. Even in the Christian, so to speak, camp, there are people who are really just seeking that comfort. And I think more and more what we're seeing is people come against something that culturally is being accepted. And because the Bible doesn't agree with it, they say, oh, well, then that's not what the Bible says.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
The Bible says this, or it means this, so that this is okay. And that's just not how it works.
I think we might be onto something here in that I would hesitate to say, here's a working definition of heresy or heretic, but it seems as though the difference is whether you're selfishly motivated or not. Like, I remember, the late Michael Heiser talking about high-handed sins in the Old Testament, that there were some things it's just like, good and well what you're doing, and you did it anyway, and that gets a different consequence. And so I think part of what, we're led astray when we want to let ourselves or somebody else off the hook and call it grace. So a lot of the kind of attempt to redefine the morals of the scriptures, especially when it comes to sexuality, for example, are rooted in, seems to me, trying to allow us. They're basically about satisfying our own desires rather than trying to hold to an ethic and a way of life that brings life that God designed. And I don't just mean that for like, I don't just mean that for people who are same-sex attracted or who are gender fluid or whatever. I think I see heterosexual, cisgendered people doing the same thing, trying to find excuses for why they should be able to have all the sex they want, or that their partner owes them all the sex they want, or whatever. It's such a wide spectrum of things, and at the root of it is, I think, to a point, is I want what I want, and I'm going to try to mold the truth to suit that rather than the other way around. I wonder if that's a better way to think about or define heresy.
I think it is. And I think there's a lot of other things that come down to that motive. I mean, I was thinking a little bit this week, and just even thinking about, again, as I looked at that definition and just that kind of broad landscape, I mean, there are times where we say things that may sound heretical just because it's not what the church is generally espousing. I mean, Jesus was labeled a heretic by many.
Totally.
Because he was going against what was culturally and religiously the norm. Now, he knew more than they did, right? And so there's a difference there. And so I think we have to be careful, because just because you say something that's maybe labeled heretical does not mean you're necessarily a heretic or that you're wrong. I mean, again, there's the side where you could be figuring things out and you are saying something that's problematic, but you're not trying to divide. Maybe it's still a heretical statement, but you're, hopefully you're in community and can receive correction for that, is what I would say.
I think
I do think...
Yeah. Go ahead.
I do think we just have to be careful, because it may be that, you're labeled that when you're trying to bring people more toward the truth. Mm-hmm. But because you're in this group that's so far from it, you're labeled that. And
I think you're onto something about the community bit, because accountability is different than policing. Mm-hmm. And I think that is what I think of when I think of the word heretic or heresy, is that people's attempt to police the gospel, not to protect or hold people accountable to it, but to police people's response to it. And in the kind of Western Christian tradition, a lot of the conversations around heresy or heretics have to do with the powerful religious structure punishing people who don't agree with whatever the religious party line is, basically. So thinking of people, thinking of the Inquisition, thinking of the Catholic Church in particular, their history with how they dealt with what they would call theological aberrations, what John Calvin's response to some of the people that disagreed with him, the response to Martin Luther, on and on. Anyway, returning to kind of the policing conversation, I think when the response is not of loving brothers and sisters trying to, in love, that's a lot of loves in one sentence, to correct or to lead or to shepherd somebody that they feel is in error, it's instead, you have committed the crime of thinking something different than what we have all agreed on, and we're going to punish you for it. Either you get in line or you will be punished. I think that's another thing that I think of and that I've seen from certain theological camps is it's not, man, we're concerned about you. It's like, how dare you even say anything that is not what we have, is not part of our theological system. You freaking traitor. Almost, yeah. I feel is what it's like sometimes. Like the whole farewell Rob Bell thing. I forget which. Do you recall who it was that said that about him?
I don't know, and I didn't follow it closely.
Was it John Piper?
I'm not sure. I know Francis Chan wrote a book. I think
in response,
in response to.
Well, what I mean is
Bell's,
there was a prominent Christian leader, thinker, pastor, theologian. It may have been John Piper, but don't quote me like that. Who, after the book came out, just tweeted "Farewell, Rob Bell," and a lot of people were like, "Yeah, standing up for the truth," and then a lot of other people were like, "Dude, how is this in any way a loving response?" And so, but
it was John Piper.
Okay,
You're right.
Okay, but that also begs the question: at what point do you take a firmer stance on things, and how is that? How is the constructive way to do that? A lot of what we talk about is that things are complicated by platform. That if it was just a group of people in a local church setting, it kind of wouldn't be as big of a deal. But because people are writing books and building platforms and are known and have millions of social media followers or whatever, that suddenly your words carry a different kind of weight.
Yeah, they do. And I think, man, I think that line's important. That's what I was going to ask you, and you kind of got there before me. I think there's a point where we have to stand up, where we have to address it. And I think doing so can also get you in trouble with people, right? But, you know, it's something I've referenced a few times on here is that American Gospel documentary, or the American Gospel documentaries. I think there's 2 of them now that I've watched. I think they're working on the 3rd one. And it kind of comes after some people. Now, I highly recommend it. I think it's great, and there's not really anything in there that I would say I disagree with, but it does come after people who are teaching things like, you know, the prosperity gospel, or who are teaching kind of little God theology and different things like that that are popular, and even just addressing like, hey, this is stuff we're listening to the music of in our church. Do you know what they're teaching?
Yeah.
And of course, then there's the whole question. Well, then do you throw out everything because the pastor's speaking, you know, things that may be heretical, or is this music that actually, you know what, these songs here are pretty solid, you know, theologically or biblically or whatever. Are they now negated because the person who they allow to teach the church has some pretty, you know, dangerous mindsets? I think it's a tough kind of conversation.
It is, and it's further complicated by Scripture itself and the people who wrote it. And the lives of the people who wrote it, because using that same slide rule, you'd have to throw out a lot of the Psalms that David wrote, because while he had moments where he was following God, there were a lot of moments when he didn't, and his life did not end with him following God. They ended with him instituting a coup against one of his sons, basically. Yeah. So it's just, I think it's that reactionary policing that bothers me. And that I kind of want to, that's one of my motivations to talk about, because I definitely have convictions, and I believe some things are true, and it doesn't matter what you think about them. But if we don't speak the truth in love, then we know what Paul says that we are.
I mean, and I think that's a lot of even why we got into doing this, is because, look, there's things that we see that are blatantly wrong. And when you come against that, what you have often are groups of people who are shouting or sitting quietly watching, you know, and on each side. And typically, unfortunately, the people who are sitting quiet I feel like are more knowledgeable than the ones who are screaming.
Yeah.
But they can't be heard because you've got so many who are just loud on the subject. And, unfortunately, we don't have these opportunities to sit and to talk with people who disagree or don't look for the opportunities. They're probably there. We just, that's uncomfortable, so let's not do that. But because of that, there's just not anything happening different. We've got people yelling. You've got people who know what they're talking about being quiet. And, man, all we do is to your point, clanging cymbals. Like, that's, not a great way to have conversation. And so that's part of why we wanted to do this, and to try and find that middle ground.
I hope what we could implore folks to do, and what we hopefully are going to try and do, is either not to be, I think this is something we say at work, we want to be hard on ideas, but not on people. And conversely, we don't want to be too soft on people either, which may sound strange, but because, part the kind of the more obvious, there are kind of two obvious responses that I think are happening. One is to paint with a very harsh broad strokes brush that if you don't agree with these things, you're not in the camp, and we will come down as harshly. We are servants and protectors of the truth, so we feel justified in coming down on you as harshly as we need and calling it accountability or calling it protecting the truth or whatever. Conversely, there is, I think, a response that calls itself grace that is actually just license to continue to live in sin and to not die to yourself. Yes, enabling. That says, well, we don't want people to feel bad. We don't want people to feel ostracized. We don't want people to feel the pain of wrestling with their sin nature. So we're going to make it easier. Now, I don't think that's the way that it takes shape in any of our heads, but that's what ends up happening is the whole, and I want to have an episode about this, but the whole, I can't worship a God who fill in the blank. I've heard a lot of that conversation from kind of the other side of these issues. And it's just like, bruh, you better slow down on that because, to quote John Mark Comer, the real God is anything but controllable, and you are not an authority on what he is or is not like. And we don't get to sit on that throne and decide which attributes of God that we're okay with. And that's easy to say. It's a lot harder to kind of live out and practice. But I feel like that's the other side of it, is that either we're being so harsh with people who don't line up in every way with the way that we think things need to be, or we're so lax on them that our orthodoxy ceases to be anything meaningful or even definable or discernible. And it's just the spirituality of convenience.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and that's what a lot of people want. They don't want the... When you look, if you truly read in Scripture and look for what it means to follow Christ, it is anything but what we've made it. It is uncomfortable. It is challenging. It is not safe. And we live in a culture that teaches you to pursue comfort and a life of ease and safety. And so that's really, people aren't following Christ because you shouldn't be following Christ to get those things, right? Now then you've got the whole prosperity gospel that kind of gets into that and things, but it's I don't know. There's the whole wheat and chaff thing, right? And I think you get into that a little bit when you start thinking through this and kind of exploring what's important and what we've made it. And it's so difficult that I don't even know if I know what I'm saying anymore. Like I just think we've made it something it's not. And so of course we come up to things like this. And I mean, I think to your point a second ago, the true way to kind of deal with this is if people were being discipled, I mean, of course, having a thought that may not line up completely because you don't know that's gonna happen. But if you're being discipled and you're in a place of accountability, someone's going to lead you through that instead of scream at you, right? I mean,
Yeah.
leading someone through that and teaching them is better than screaming them through it. Like, that's not going to work. It's not gonna help things. It's just gonna make it worse. And
I had an interaction with somebody a few years ago in which we were having conversations about these kind of things, frankly. And this was somebody who had some questions about the way church was done and what they had grew up in and the nature of the Bible and all this stuff. And so I went up to the office to meet with them. And they had started the conversation with somebody else already, and I walked into a shouting match because they were quite far apart, these two folks, and it was like it's like you plucked each one of them from central casting to represent their different viewpoints, and there they were just bouncing off of each other. And at some point, one of them turned to me and was like, "What do you think?" I was like, "I think this is not what I showed up to do. Like, this is a shouting match, and that's like I'm not into it." I'll happily talk to either one or both of y'all, but this is not good or constructive.
Yeah.
And it was a shame because, like, one of them had honest questions, but those questions really, for lack of a better word, scared the other person, I think, or they weren't in the mindset to have their entire way of life questioned in this way. We're very uncomfortable with it. And I don't say that to indict either one of them, because when you feel things strongly, you tend to respond and react strongly when they're called into question. And that's what was happening. These two were calling each other into question. And if you don't have, I guess there's no easy way to do that. It takes work and patience and love and all those things, and catch any of us on the wrong day, and we may not respond that same way. I certainly have many instances where I haven't responded. When I was in kind of late teens, early 20s, first started asking questions, I got really mad at what I saw around me that felt like it wasn't lining up with what Scripture teaches about how to do church and love people. And I just went around starting word fights with people, and that's not constructive. And I had to grow out of it, basically, and learn that, like, dude, just because, quote, you're right, doesn't mean that anything that you're doing is helpful or constructive or loving.
Yeah. I can think of moments too. Not of you, but for me. Yeah,
so if he who knows what the right thing is to do but doesn't do it does evil, isn't that heresy? The heretic in us all?
Yeah, that's it. And I think that's where I'm at. I mean, there's a lot that if you're in community and you're seeking, I think is understandable, is forgivable, is not that it matters if we forgive, but like, I think there's a pretty wide array there now. And to your point, I think it's important for us just to be all aware that we can easily end up there if we're not careful.
Yeah.
I think, I think back to a moment as you were, kind of citing your example, there was a point in college where a good friend of mine had come and said something and that I felt was problematic and still would think is problematic, and tried to have the conversation. And when it wasn't getting through, I quickly kind of got up in arms about it. And, really it cost that friendship for a few years. It's all fine now. But in hindsight, even if I was right, which I'm not saying I for sure was, I feel that I was, but I could be wrong, right? Even if I was, I didn't handle it in the best way to help him. And so, hopefully I've grown. There's still times I get loud because there's passion and it comes out, right? But it's definitely a warning and a reminder to be careful how we communicate and how we talk to each other, and to do it in love. If you want to be heard, there's probably a better way to say things than yelling. Odd how that works, huh?
I think we landed on something that kind of makes sense, which is your motivation for, like, where is this coming from? Is it about benefiting you? Like, taking an honest look about it. How are you benefiting from what you believe and the platform that you build on it? So that's kind of the first thing. And then the second thing is that, well, if we just spoke the truth in love, then we don't need to use this word, really.
Yeah.
Because our motivation is not to say who's on the team and who's not, but our motivation is to make sure that everybody stays in the family.
Yeah. Well, I mean, do we think there is, and maybe this is another podcast, or maybe we need to get into it more, I don't know, but is there a line where it's like, nope, that is blatant heresy? And maybe we talked about that a little bit, but I mean...
I think maybe it bears discussion. I go back to Paul's statement, I resolved to preach nothing but Christ and him crucified. And I feel like anything we add onto that is probably secondary. Or in Jesus' case, like my work is this, to do what I see my Father doing. And we know what the Father is like.
Why do we make it so stinking difficult then? when it should be that easy?
Yeah, man,
You know?
I don't. Life under the sun, life combating with the law of sin and death all around us, I think is what complicates things.
We're just a bunch of idiots.
Stumbling towards greatness or trying to.
Yeah. That's the problem, though. We're trying to stumble toward our own greatness.
All right, that's episode 35. And as you probably heard, these conversations always just raise more questions than they bring answers, it seems. But that's the life of the believer, I reckon. Thank you all for listening. We're going to keep doing these as long as we can. We are very much enjoying it and feel sharpened and kind of, I don't know, feel it's constructive.
It does. And we hope it is for you all, too, and that, it's more than just something to listen to on your way to work, but it's something to kind of help you grow and learn and have conversations that are difficult. So we would love to hear from you if that is the case, and you can find us by sending us an email at unbetweenpodcast@gmail.com. And I'm looking at Taylor to make sure I'm saying all this wrong. On Twitter, we are unbetweenpod, and then we're also on Instagram and Facebook. And you can look up Unbetween Podcast and find us there.
He got it all right, folks. He got it all right.
Hey, I have my moments.
See, I was talking about wisdom earlier, and then there it is.
There's
Thanks,
my
y'all.
wisdom for the day. We'll see you on the next one.